I swear to you, A. Karen smashed through my smart lock at 300 a.m. Every strike echoed through my security system. Every failed code attempt triggered an alert on my phone. She didn't sneak, she didn't hide. She genuinely believed she had the right. It was 2:47 a.m. in Chicago. Jack Malone jolted awake as his phone buzzed with a rapid-fire burst of security notifications from the family cabin he'd inherited in Willowbrook. This wasn't just motion detection, this was a high-priority breach. Exterior cameras flashing lock tampering alerts. Shock sensors on the door lit up like fireworks. Jack's heart pounded as he tapped open the live feed. And there she was, Karen, president of the Willowbrook Homeowners Association, clipboard queen. The same woman who'd once told him, "If you insist on running your little rental circus, don't be surprised when the community pushes back." Now, dressed head to toe in black, gloves on, flashlight in hand, she was standing on his porch like she owned the place. Karen didn't hesitate. She entered a code into the smart lock. Incorrect. Again, incorrect. 5 attempts later, the system froze for 15 minutes. She stood there waiting, patient, then started again. Jack's hand tightened around his phone. He didn't call 911, not yet. He switched on every camera, hit record, and watched in real time as Karen, this HOA enforcer turned midnight burglar, worked her way into a felony. When the third lockout cycle ended, Karen seemed to lose patience. From her coat pocket, she pulled a small hammer, and then thunk, thunk, thunk. She started striking the lock mechanism with steady, deliberate force. To anyone else, this was a break-in. To Karen, this was community enforcement. But Jack knew the truth. This wasn't about HOA policy. This was about possession, control, greed. Because that cabin wasn't just a property. It was a legacy. The last remaining piece of his late grandmother, Eleanor. The woman who raised him. The woman who made summers magical. The woman who left him a handwritten note that read, "Don't let anyone take this from you, Jack. This cabin holds our memories." What Karen didn't know was that she wasn't alone. That night, the cabin had guests. David and Sarah Kim. A couple in their 40s who'd rented it for a quiet weekend escape. But David wasn't just a guest. He was a professional audio surveillance engineer, and when the hammering began, he didn't panic. He picked up his directional microphone and started recording. Every word, every breath, every illegal move. Back in Chicago, Jack watched it unfold. Every motion, every attempt, every muttered plan Karen didn't realize she was saying out loud. "Once I get inside and document the violations, the city'll have no choice but to condemn it." This wasn't a mistake. This was premeditated, a final push in what had been building for months. Because 3 months earlier, Jack had listed the cabin on Airbnb. And just 4 hours later, Karen showed up with an 8-page violation notice, a practiced smile, and eyes that said, "This cabin doesn't belong to you." Not really. That night, 300 a.m., wasn't just a break-in. It was proof, undeniable, unfiltered, unlawful. And Jack, he wasn't going to let this be swept under the rug. Because Karen had just crossed the line. And she had no idea how far Jack was willing to go to protect his grandmother's legacy. Or how much evidence she had just handed him. Before it became a battleground, before HOA Karen invaded it like she owned the place, there was once peace. And that peace lived within 800 square feet of weathered wood, creaking floorboards, the buzz of cicadas in the summer, and the scent of apple pie drifting from a tiny stove. That cabin by Pine Lake wasn't real estate. It was home, it was history. It was everything Jack had left of his childhood. Every summer as a boy, Jack had been dropped off at the cabin by his grandmother, Eleanor. A gentle woman with strong hands, silver hair tied in a bun, and a soul woven from patience. There was no TV, no phone signal. But there were fireflies, canoe rides crackling firewood, and late nights lying on the couch with a blanket pulled up to his chin, listening to Eleanor read aloud in the glow of the hearth. To Eleanor, the cabin wasn't luxury. It was sanctuary. And once, during one of those golden summers, she looked Jack in the eye and said, "No matter what happens, this cabin will always be ours. Don't ever let anyone take it away from you." Jack, he never forgot. When she passed, Jack didn't call a realtor. He drove to the cabin. Alone, he swept the dust off the floor, folded the quilt Eleanor used to wrap around him, ran his fingers across the fireplace stone she'd hand-painted. In her old jewelry box, beneath layers of time-worn scarves and tucked away rosary beads, he found a folded, yellowed piece of paper, her handwriting fading but fiercey. "This cabin is our family's memory, Jack. Don't let anyone take it from you." Signed simply Eleanor. To others, the place was rustic. To Jack, it was a soul. And when the bills came, property taxes, maintenance, rising insurance, instead he crafted a plan. He installed a state-of-the-art smart lock system with remote access, placed 15 security cameras both outside and inside shared spaces, added Wi-Fi boosters, backup batteries, and emergency detectors, and curated every inch for weekend guests on Airbnb. The goal wasn't profit, it was preservation. If renting the cabin paid to keep it alive, Jack would do it, with pride. When he posted the listing, it took just hours to get attention. A booking, a few favorites, a few glowing messages. And then, exactly 4 hours later, someone knocked at the door. Not a guest. Karen. She stood there in a gray business suit despite the 85-degree heat, clipboard in hand. Hair pulled so tight Jack swore she couldn't blink. And she didn't smile. Jack Malone. She asked without asking. I'm Karen, president of the Willowbrook Homeowners Association. I'm here because your short-term rental is disrupting the uniform aesthetic of this community. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask permission to enter. She stepped onto the porch like it was hers and began documenting Matt wind chimes, porch swing, bird feeder. Jack thought it was a misunderstanding. He offered coffee. She refused. Instead, she dropped an 8-page violation notice onto his table. Karen accused him of violating community harmony, introducing transient elements, and threatening neighborhood security. She demanded he cease all rental activity within 14 days, or face escalating fines, starting at $50 per day up to $500. Jack was stunned, not angry, not yet. That would come later. That night, unable to sleep, Jack reopened Eleanor's old shoeboxes. Among yellowed receipts and photographs, he found something chilling. A manila envelope labeled in bold, correspondence with Karen. Inside were 3 letters from Karen, all sent during Eleanor's final year. One kindly requesting to buy the cabin. One offering to purchase it at 40% below market value. One not so kind, Mrs. Malone. Your continued refusal to consider reasonable offers is obstructing progress that would benefit the entire community. I trust you'll reconsider before circumstances require more direct intervention. And at the very back, a draft Eleanor had written but never sent. Her handwriting shook, but her words, solid as stone. Karen believes she can intimidate an old woman into giving up this cabin. She's wrong. This place belongs to my family. No threat will change that. Below, in trembling ink, she wrote, Jack, if anything happens to me, don't trust Karen. She wants the cabin. But not for the reasons she claims. Protect our memories. Jack's fingers tightened around the letter. Everything suddenly made sense. Karen hadn't just targeted the cabin after Eleanor passed. She had her sights on it while Eleanor was still alive. And now Jack understood this wasn't just about community standards. It was personal. It was premeditated. It was war. The next morning, Jack returned to the cabin with a strange chill crawling up his spine. Where once the porch felt like a threshold to peace, it now felt like a front line. What had been Eleanor's sanctuary was now a battleground, targeted by a woman he'd never met until days ago. And now, Karen was treating it like an enemy stronghold. She didn't waste time. At exactly 9:00 a.m., a silver sedan pulled into the gravel driveway with mechanical precision. Karen stepped out, clipboard in hand, flanked this time by a decibel meter, a DSLR camera, and what looked like a laser measurement tool. No greeting, no small talk, just a statement cold and clinical. I'm conducting a routine compliance inspection under Section 4.6 of the June Amendments. Jack barely had time to blink before she began measuring everything. The distance from the porch swing to the sidewalk, the height of the roof eaves, the brightness level of the porch light. Community compliance had become her war cry, and she wielded it like a weapon. The porch light was too bright, disruptive to neighboring residents. The swing Eleanor installed decades ago, structural hazard. Even the bird feeder, a legacy from Jack's childhood, was cited as encouraging unsanctioned wildlife activity. Who Jack, trying to stay civil, asked, "May I see the documentation for these rules?" Karen didn't blink. She handed him an 8-page packet titled, Willowbrook Community Covenant Amendments effective immediately. At the bottom, only one signature, Karen. He flipped to the last page. Due to emergency community safety concerns, these amendments are enacted under executive authority. No vote required. That night, Jack called the HOA office. A woman named Linda, soft-spoken, hesitant, picked up. Oh no, sweetie, there was no vote. Karen said it was an emergency update. She told us under HOA bylaws she didn't need approval for this one. Jack was silent. Linda lowered her voice to a whisper. To be honest, a few of us questioned it, but Karen said pushing back would result in additional penalties. Most folks stopped asking. Jack sat in silence, staring at the packet in his hands. And in that moment, he realized Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was creating them, twisting the HOA charter to fit her agenda, weaponizing silence, and disguising domination as duty. But it wasn't just her authority that disturbed Jack. It was the speed at which she appeared after the Airbnb listing, the speed at which she passed new amendments, the speed of her 9 a.m. patrols, arriving like clockwork every morning. No hesitation, no randomness. This was premeditated. Jack returned to Eleanor's bedroom and began sifting through her old document boxes, her filing drawers, her hidden cubbies. Behind a stack of winter quilts, he found a wooden chest with a small, worn label, "Important Karen." Inside was a small, black USB stick, handwritten in silver marker. Jack plugged it into his laptop. 12 audio files appeared, all titled by date, all crisp, all recorded by Eleanor, and all of them featured Karen. The first few were polite, Karen making friendly offers to purchase the cabin. The later ones were sterner, suggesting the property was in violation. But the final recordings were chilling. Jack sat back, listening with headphones as his grandmother, in a frail but unwavering voice, responded to Karen's threats. "Karen, you can bully me all you want, but this cabin will not leave my family's hands." Jack's stomach twisted. His jaw clenched. He heard Karen's voice again, confident, methodical, entitled. "If you won't sell it voluntarily, I'll ensure the city makes it impossible to keep. Property codes are flexible when interpreted creatively, Mrs. Malone." Jack knew then, this wasn't about rules. This was a takeover, a woman using her title as a mask for something far darker. And she had been planning it since before Eleanor died. But Karen had underestimated one thing. Eleanor knew. She'd documented it. She'd prepared Jack, left him the evidence, the voice, the words. Don't trust her, Jack. She wants the cabin, but not for the reasons she says. And now, Karen had made her biggest mistake. She woke a legacy that would fight back. Jack sat motionless in his chair. The headphones hugged his ears. His eyes were fixed on the audio player on screen. And the voice in his ears wasn't his grandmother's. It was Karen's, clear, crisp, and calculated. "If you won't sell, I'll make sure this cabin becomes a burden. The city will have to intervene. I know how to bend the rules when necessary." This wasn't a suggestion. This wasn't even a threat. It was a plan. Jack replayed it once, twice, a third time. Each time his pulse tightened, each word sliced deeper. Karen had spoken with the confidence of someone who believed her power would never be questioned. But what she didn't know was that Eleanor had recorded everything. Every call, meticulously saved, 12 labeled by date. Some even had handwritten notes attached, slipped into a wooden box Jack had found beneath Eleanor's bed. 3:00 p.m. Call Karen louder this time. Mentions pushing HOA enforcement further. But that wasn't all. Tucked beneath the audio files in the box were dozens of yellowed letters, folded and stored with care. They were correspondence between Eleanor and other residents in the Willowbrook community. Names Jack recognized immediately. Robert Chen, who was fined for excessive holiday lights. Linda Martinez, cited for nonconforming curtains. The Kim family, who once suspected someone was taking photos of their bedroom windows at night. One name appeared across all the letters: Karen. The letters described escalating pressure, manipulation, and silent retaliation whenever someone refused to comply with her vision for the community. But Eleanor wasn't silent. She had been watching, documenting, organizing. One letter to Linda Reed. "One must come together before one woman decides the fate of an entire neighborhood. I'm not afraid of Karen, but I also won't be the only one standing." What Jack had uncovered wasn't just personal. It was systemic. Eleanor had quietly become the community's lone protector, gathering evidence, building a case, planning for the day when someone else would have to take the baton. That day had come. The final audio file hit like a sledgehammer. Karen's voice was sharp and smug. "You don't get it, Eleanor. This cabin is the final piece. I've already secured 47 properties. Once you're gone, this whole process will be a lot simpler." Jack froze. 47 properties. Final piece. His hands shook as he rifled through the files and pulled out a blueprint of Willowbrook from Eleanor's files. One she had marked with red dots and margin notes. He laid it out across the dining table and began connecting the dots. Every red-marked home surrounded Pine Lake. And his grandmother's cabin, the only remaining lot with direct lakefront access. The map was undeniable. Karen wasn't just pushing Jack to shut down his Airbnb. She was executing a long-term acquisition scheme, one property at a time. Closing in on the last plot of land that stood between her and what? Jack sifted through the final letters and then found it a phone conversation labeled "Final Threat." Karen's voice again, clear as crystal. Look, Eleanor. The development team is ready to move forward. I need your cabin. With it, we complete the shoreline. Without it, they hold the funds. The project stalls. I can't let that happen. Then Eleanor's voice, shaky but still firms. This cabin stays in my family. I don't care how much money or pressure you throw at me. It's not for sale. Jack's chest tightened. This wasn't an overzealous HOA president. This wasn't about community aesthetics. It was a real estate conquest. And Karen, she wasn't working alone. She was just the front. A well-dressed battering ram for something far more powerful. Jack stayed up all night. He printed everything. Audio transcripts, letters, photos, HOA amendments, property records, surveillance logs. Then, at exactly 300 a.m., he opened his laptop and typed an email. Subject, looking for an attorney who knows how to take down an abusive OA. He hit send. 1 hour later, a reply landed. My name is Sophia. I've taken down 2 OAs in Arizona and 1 in Colorado. Send me everything. I think we're about to make a very good team. Jack looked back at the dark cabin windows. Karen had pushed too far. And now, she'd awakened something. Eleanor had spent a lifetime protecting a family that refuses to be bullied. By sunrise, Jack wasn't exhausted. He was focused. The hours he'd spent combing through Eleanor's records had peeled back a disturbing truth. But now, with a full arsenal of evidence at his fingertips, and the unexpected reply from attorney Sophia Chen, Jack felt something unfamiliar in his chest control. At exactly 9:15 a.m., his phone rang. Jack, the voice on the other end was calm, clear, and purposeful. This is Sophia. I've reviewed your attachments. You're not just dealing with a hostile HOA. You're looking at a coordinated land grab wrapped in legal camouflage. Jack blinked. You believe me. Sophia let out a soft laugh. Jack, I've been chasing people like Karen across 3 states. But this is the most elegant fraud I've ever seen, and we're going to tear it apart piece by piece. They met in person 2 days later at Sophia's law office in downtown San Diego. She was 31, sharp-eyed, and carried herself like someone who had been underestimated her entire life, and turned that into a weapon. Sophia began with the basics. Under California HOA law, any amendment to community covenants must be proposed in writing, sent to all residents at least 30 days in advance, approved in a properly noticed vote by a supermajority. Karen did none of those things. That makes every amendment she enforced void. That's our entry point. Jack laid out the recordings, the letters, the printed maps, and USB audio files on Sophia's table like puzzle pieces. She examined each one, her highlighter flying across documents like a surgeon's scalpel. With every line of HO overreach, every clause that lacked legal backing, Sophia's grin widened. This isn't just procedural abuse. This is fraud under color of authority. It's civil rights territory. Then she tapped the map. And these 47 homes, that's conspiracy, possibly RISO level. Sophia mapped out a 2-phase strategy: defensive action, preemptively file for a cease and desist against Karen's illegal inspections and fines. Offensive strike, file a lawsuit for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraudulent enforcement of invalid covenants, invasion of privacy, and violation of OA governance laws. Once we hit discovery, Sophia added, we get access to Karen's emails, financial records, and internal HOA communications. And something tells me she's been sloppy. Jack nodded slowly, still trying to believe this was real. Do you think we can win? Sophia looked up and said, simply, no. I think we can bury her. And just like that, the fight became official. Within 48 hours, Sophia filed the initial complaint in county court. They requested an emergency injunction to block Karen from imposing fines or entering Jack's property. And then they dropped the hammer. $230,000 in civil suit. The timing couldn't have been better. Because 2 days later, Jack's security system captured something that tipped the case from serious to criminal. At exactly 2:47 a.m., again, Karen returned to the cabin. But this time, she didn't sneak. She looked straight into the cameras. She had a flashlight, a notepad, and a hammer. She attempted multiple passcodes again methodically. When the lock froze, she began striking the keypad, same as before. But what made this moment different was what David Kim, the guest staying that night, captured on his own equipment. David wasn't just a weekend visitor anymore. He had brought professional audio surveillance gear with him: parabolic microphones, pressure mics, and directional recorders. And this time, he captured more than hammering. He captured Karen talking to herself. 18 months of planning and one stubborn lock is all that stands in my way. Once I get the violations documented, the city will have no choice but to condemn it. 47 properties secured. One left. That's all Grandview needs. Jack sat frozen when Sophia played the recording back in her office. Did she just say Grandview? Sophia's face went pale. Yes, and that name changes everything. Because Grandview wasn't a local HOA vendor. It was a multi-state development corporation with deep pockets, and an even deeper history of legal gray zones. Sophia leaned forward. If Grandview's involved, then Karen isn't just a power-hungry OA president. She's a contractor, executing a property acquisition plan. And this recording is a confession. Jack was speechless. Sophia wasn't. We're going to file for discovery immediately. I want every HOA meeting transcript. Every homeowner complaint, every communication Karen has ever had with Grandview. If she's under contract, we'll find it. And when we do, she won't just lose her HOA position. Sophia sat back and said with fire in her voice, she'll lose everything. But Karen wasn't finished. The very next morning, Jack received a certified letter from Karen's attorney, from a law firm called Thornfield and Associates. The message: Karen was suing Jack for $650,000, claiming entrapment, conspiracy, and malicious prosecution. And the most chilling part, they were also requesting to reopen Eleanor's death certificate, accusing Jack of potential foul play to inherit the cabin. Sophia read the letter, slowly, quietly. Then she looked up at Jack. Karen's not acting alone anymore. This is bigger than her. Someone is trying to shut you up. But guess what, Jack? She leaned forward, her tone fierce but calm. They just declared war on the wrong guy. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the familiar alerts returned. Jack's phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Still half asleep in his Chicago apartment, he blinked at the screen, heart already racing. Unauthorized access attempt. Smart lock compromised, front entry. Motion detected, porch, living room window. Recording. Karen mode, MP4 activated. He opened the app, and there she was. Karen dressed head to toe in black, flashlight in hand. Gloves, clipboard. And this time she didn't care about hiding. She stared directly into the camera, then started entering passcodes. 1, 3. Each time triggering the system lockout timer. But she wasn't guessing. She had a list, and she was working through it. Inside the cabin, the Kims, David and Sarah, were wide awake by now. But David wasn't just a guest anymore. He was a surveillance audio specialist. And tonight, he brought out everything: directional microphones, shotgun recorders, and sensitive frequency boosters. He hit record just as Karen muttered to herself, 18 months of planning, and this stubborn lock is the only thing in my way. All I need is evidence of violations. The city will have to condemn it. 47 properties secured. One holdout left. So Jack listened in real time through a Bluetooth stream from David's setup. His heart dropped with every word. But then, it got worse. Karen made a phone call on speaker. David's equipment picked up everything. Mr. Thornfield. Yes? I'm inside the property now, documenting the violations we discussed. Electrical systems outdated, unpermitted modifications, unsafe conditions throughout. Once I submit this report, the health department and insurance board will step in. Once it's condemned, the buyout proceeds. We're ready to move forward. Jack nearly dropped his phone. She wasn't just harassing him. She was executing a takedown plan coordinated with a third party. And that party had a name now: Thornfield. Worse, Karen was turning the cabin into a safety hazard on paper. Not because it was unsafe, but to engineer legal condemnation. Jack called 911. He explained the situation, described the footage, sent the live link. 12 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. But Karen didn't run. She didn't even flinch. She walked out of the cabin with a folder full of photographs and handwritten notes. And as the officers approached, she said loudly, right into David's recording device, "Officers, thank you for responding. I'm Karen Blake, HO President. I'm conducting an emergency safety inspection following community complaints. The property is being illegally rented for commercial use. I have documentation." But the officer in front of her wasn't just any officer. It was Officer Martinez, the same man Karen had once tried to have removed from HOA patrol duty years ago. He remembered, and he wasn't impressed. "Mom," he said, calm but stern, "step back from the property. Keep your hands visible." Karen scoffed. "You clearly don't understand how HOA authority works. I have every right." Martinez cut her off and pointed at the broken smart lock. "Are you saying you had legal authority to damage private property to enter this home?" Karen replied without hesitation, "This isn't breaking. This is protection. I am obligated." Martinez held up his phone and pressed play. Karen's voice filled the air, caught on Jack's security cameras. Her exact words from just 30 minutes earlier, I'll make this cabin impossible to keep." Her face fell, and then Officer Chen, Martinez's partner, approached from the patrol car with several evidence bags and a laptop. "Martinez," she called out, "we've got a match. Active FBI investigation. Karen Blake is flagged in a federal database. White-collar crime division. Property fraud." Karen froze. Chen opened the trunk of Karen's car and found master keys to over 30 properties, USB drives labeled by address, banking documents tied to Grandview Development Corporation, a GPS tracker linked to Jack's cabin. The scope of it hit everyone like a punch to the chest. Karen wasn't alone. She was part of a coordinated effort, using her HOA title to secure land on behalf of a $40 million resort development project. Inside the USB drives, floor plans, personal data of residents, Vatican info, and dozens of phone call recordings with someone labeled only as the client. In one call, Karen said, "The Malone property is the final piece. Once we pressure the sale, the entire lakeshore unlocks. They'll never know I've been controlling the narrative from the HOA board this whole time." It was over. Officer Chen read the charges aloud. Karen Blake was arrested for breaking and entering fraudulent misuse of HOA authority, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, violation of civil rights under color of law, participation in a multi-state property fraud scheme. As the patrol car drove away, with Karen in the back, finally silent, Jack sat in his apartment, staring at the screen. He should have felt relief. But what he felt was deeper. This wasn't just about Karen. Because the name Thornfield had come up. Because the documents mentioned a company with hundreds of millions at stake. Because Karen was just a foot soldier, and the war was far from over. The morning after Karen's arrest, Jack's phone didn't stop buzzing. News stations, lawyers, reporters, neighbors he hadn't spoken to in years, beloved by some, feared by many, had just become national news. Headlines exploded. HOA president arrested in multi-million-dollar land scheme. Xabin owner's cameras expose a 40-year M real estate conspiracy. Willowbrook HOA under federal investigation. But what the world didn't know yet, and what Jack was just starting to understand, was that Karen was never the architect. She was just the face. The real story was hidden in the FBI documents now flowing into Sophia's inbox like floodwater. Sophia sat in her office, eyes scanning a federal affidavit stamped with the seal of the Department of Justice. Karen Blake acted as a proxy for Grandview Development Corp., which is now under investigation for organized property manipulation, falsified HO enforcement, and fraudulent foreclosure activity across 5 states. She exhaled slowly. "Jack, this is bigger than we thought. This isn't just about Pine Lake. It's about how wealthy developers use HOA loopholes to quietly seize land, piece by piece, without anyone noticing until it's too late. Grandview Development wasn't just any company. It was a shell corporation, traced back to a parent entity known only as Cypress Holdings, with ties to international investors, political donations, and offshore accounts. The company had funneled millions into local communities under the guise of revitalization grants. In reality, they were buying influence on HOA boards, installing puppets like Karen, and systematically rewriting neighborhood covenants to force out legacy homeowners. Karen wasn't their first project. She was their 10th. The FBI had been tracking Cypress Holdings for years, but they never had enough evidence. Until now. Karen's hard drives, her phone logs, Jack's surveillance footage, and especially the audio files Eleanor had saved. Those files prove Karen had been under direct instruction to Z. Fabricate safety concerns, issue baseless fines. Apply pressure until properties were either sold or condemned, then file reports triggering emergency purchase programs. The cabin was just one of 67 properties in the Pine Lake region that had been targeted, but it was the last one still owned by a private citizen, and Eleanor Malone, Jack's grandmother, had been the final obstacle to a multi-year plan that would have given Cypress Holdings full control of Pine Lake's shoreline. They planned to build a luxury resort, complete with private docks, gated trails, artificial beaches, and zero access for the community that once lived there. Sophia leaned back in her chair. They were 2 months away from breaking ground. If Karen had succeeded with the cabin, we'd be sitting on a corporate empire with no trace of how they got the land. Jack shook his head. They would have erased my grandmother. Sophia nodded. And everyone like her. The FBI asked Jack to testify. He agreed. He flew out to D.C. with Sophia by his side, carrying a binder filled with Eleanor's notes, USB drives, and digital evidence. They sat across from a dozen federal agents, men and women who'd been chasing the shadows of Cypress Holdings for nearly a decade. Jack, once just a grieving grandson, was now the key witness in a federal probe that would reshape land regulation policies across the country. But justice wouldn't come easy, because Cypress Holdings had deep pockets. And now, they were fighting back, with lawyers, political pressure, and PR firms. They tried to paint Jack as a disgruntled tenant, and Eleanor as an eccentric hoarder who resisted community progress. But the truth was louder. Karen's own words, the GPS tracking logs, the HOA amendments with her signature, and no vote. It was all there. The house of cards was falling fast. And then came the moment Jack didn't expect. The FBI agent in charge, Agent Ramsey, slid a folder across the table. "We think your grandmother knew all along what was coming. She wasn't just recording Karen. She was preparing a lawsuit." Jack opened the folder. Inside was a draft titled, "Malone vs. Willowbrook OA and Affiliates." It had Eleanor's signature, a list of exhibits, and handwritten annotations like, "Karen is not acting alone. Property law firm Thornfield linked to Grand View. Fight back. Jack will know what to do." Jack's throat closed. His grandmother hadn't just hoped someone would fight for the cabin. She had trusted him to do it. And now, through her recordings, her letters, her unshakable intuition, she had given him the tools to burn it all down. And he would every false fine, every shady land deal, every fake community meeting. He'd expose it all, not just for her, but for every quiet neighbor forced out. Every elderly homeowner bullied into selling. Every family that lost more than just property. Because this wasn't just about a cabin anymore. It was about reclaiming dignity, 1 acre at a time. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, reporters lining the back wall, former neighbors whispering in hushed tones. And at the center of it all, Karen Blake, flanked by her lawyers, staring down a mountain of federal charges. Gone was the clipboard, gone was the power, gone was the smug smirk of the HOA queen. She looked small, almost brittle. Jack sat quietly beside Sophia at the plaintiff's table. He didn't fidget. He didn't gloat. But his eyes were sharp, watching every second like it mattered. Because it did. For him. For Eleanor. For Pine Lake. The prosecution laid out everything. Emails. Phone calls. Surveillance ES logs. Financial documents tracing kickbacks from Grandview Development directly to Karen's offshore account. And then came the audio files. Karen's voice, recorded by Eleanor, by David Kim, and by Jack's own system, played over the speakers. "Once this cabin gets condemned, the rest will fall like dominoes. We'll have full control of Pine Lake before winter." The jury sat frozen. Karen's defense attorney tried to frame her as a misguided volunteer, overzealous but well-intentioned. But the jury wasn't buying it, especially not after Sophia stepped forward. With calm clarity and conviction, she delivered Eleanor's story. She told them about the cabin, about the fines, about the harassment, about the last handwritten legal draft Eleanor left behind, a lawsuit she never got to file. The room was silent when the verdict came down. Guilty, 7 counts, including conspiracy, fraud, destruction of property, and civil rights violations under color of law. The judge didn't hold back. "You used the illusion of community to conduct predatory real estate practices. You abused power entrusted to you. You weaponized law. And you did so with arrogance." Karen was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of early parole. But the most unforgettable moment came when the judge asked, "Does the plaintiff have any closing remarks?" Jack stood. He walked to the center of the courtroom, clutching a folded piece of paper. "My name is Jack Malone. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an activist. I'm just someone who loved his grandmother. She was kind, private. She didn't fight with fists. She fought by remembering, by documenting, by believing in justice even when it seemed slow." He looked toward Karen. "You tried to erase her, to erase what she loved. But instead, she erased you with truth." He looked at the jury. This cabin wasn't just a house. It was memory. It was love. It was everything money couldn't buy, and everything you tried to take. He paused, voice steady. "Eleanor didn't live to see justice, but you did. So thank you. For listening, for seeing her, for believing this story mattered." There was no applause, just silence. Heavy, full, sacred. A few jurors wiped tears. Sophia nodded without speaking. Karen. She couldn't even look at him. 3 months later, the cabin at Pine Lake was named a community historical landmark. The Malone Foundation was formed to help victims of HOA abuse fight back legally. Sophia ran the legal wing. Jack led storytelling and education. People from across the country came to visit the cabin, to learn, to heal, to remember. And Jack, every evening he'd sit on the porch, same rocking chair, same mug of tea. And when the wind blew through the pines just right, he'd whisper, "I kept the promise, Grandma. I did it." The legacy was safe. The land was safe. The people were safe, because Eleanor remembered. And Jack refused to forget. If this story moved you, do one thing right now: comment where you're watching from. Tell us your city, your town, your cabin, your HOA battle, so we know how far this story travels. Like this video if you believe no one should be silenced by power. Subscribe to hear more true stories where truth outshines deception and ordinary people rise against injustice. Share this video because somewhere, someone else is living this same fight, and they need to know they're not alone.